Today we have a crazy revenge story about revealing a husband's illegal side job. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, how I dealt with my homewrecker ex-bff. A long time ago, feels like ages really, my sister-in-law and I were best friends. We were like two peas in a pod, our other friends envied our friendship. Even my mom, who had always been skeptical of female friendships, admitted that she admired how we cared about each other and wished she had something like that, unlike the friends she had in high school, who were very mean to her and all ended up betraying her. Our friendship was going okay, except for issues that had to do with her being selfish, until a couple of friends and I organized a birthday picnic for her, and at the picnic, her brother admitted to having a crush on me. We were playing a game of truth and dare, and one of his friends asked if he'd ever been attracted to any of his sister's friends and who. He then said that he liked me. He said it casually, but from his friend's reaction, it was kind of obvious that it was something they'd talked about me a lot. The next Monday, I asked my best friend about what her brother had said. I was wondering if he meant it or just mentioned me because it was convenient, and also because I had a crush on him too. I liked him for the longest time, but I stopped liking him, or I forced myself to take my mind off of him when I saw that other girls liked him, way hotter and more popular girls. Also, I told my best friend and she laughed it off and assured me that it was just a silly crush. "Move in with us and I swear, your crush will disappear in no time," she'd said. Anyway, I asked if she thought he was serious and she said he was, and added that he once asked her if he could ask me to a school dance. But she told him there was no way I would say yes. Now, that wasn't true, and I expected her to know that it wasn't true since I told her that I had a crush on him. So if I had a crush on someone, why wouldn't I want to go to a school dance with him? I gasped and asked why she would tell him that. She said, "Why not? It's not like you still have that silly crush on him." I told her that it wasn't just a silly crush. I liked her brother and I'd liked him for a year. She ignored me and changed the topic, but it bothered me all through that day. Why didn't she tell me her brother liked me? Even if she didn't think my crush was serious, she could have mentioned it at least. It was just a strange behavior for someone who told me everything. After school hours, I asked if she could tell her brother that I liked him too. She frowned and said she wouldn't. When I asked why, she said that I didn't really like him and I was just excited that he liked me. That didn't make any sense at all, so I just concluded that she didn't want her brother and me to be in any kind of relationship. For weeks, I refrained from mentioning her brother, but it still bothered me that she didn't want us to be together and she wasn't even admitting that that was what it was all about. One weekend, some of the students at our school went on an excursion and I sat just a seat behind her brother on the bus. I don't know if he told the guy I was sitting with to switch seats, but the guy did and her brother and I started to talk. It was the first time we were alone together without his sister or our other friends, and we enjoyed each other's company. From that day, we started to text each other, flirt and all that, but we didn't tell my best friend. We didn't plan not to tell her, but I didn't and he didn't either. One evening, he came to my house, I went out to see him in his car, and we kissed. After that kiss, he asked me to be his girlfriend, and I said yes. While I was happy to be with him, I was confused about my best friend. She didn't even know that her brother and I had been speaking, so telling her that we were now officially boyfriend and girlfriend could ruin our friendship. I decided to tell her anyway, better to tell her and get things over with than to wait until she inevitably finds out by herself. When I told my best friend, she went ballistic on me, called me selfish and accused me of trying to steal her brother. Of course, that was a strange thing to say since he was her brother and not her boyfriend. I too got upset at how she was handling things and decided to stay away from her. We stopped being friends, but my relationship with her brother continued and even grew stronger. Weeks later, I apologized to her and begged that we go back to being friends. I was just too uncomfortable with sneaking around with her brother so as to not upset her. She accepted my apology and we continued being friends. Things were different though. Sometimes she just ignored my text. We hardly even spoke about any serious stuff, and when I would try to talk to her about stuff, she would just shut me out. One evening, she texted me and said she wasn't happy with the way things were between us, and that she'd like to go back to just how things were. I was happy about the text since I'd been looking forward to her getting over everything and us being friends again. We started hanging out more and things were almost back to normal. I noticed though that she was always trying to get me to badmouth my boyfriend. She would start conversations about him and say gross things like, "Doesn't he have a sort of body odor or something?" I should know, we use the same bathroom. Of course, I refused to make any negative comments, but that did not stop her. She just treated our relationship as though it was a complete joke. I endured all these and hoped that one day she would come to accept that I and her brother were in love, and she should be happy for us, especially me, her best friend. One afternoon, I got a text from a guy in school. He was a childhood friend, and he and I used to be quite close until he confessed that he had feelings for me. The feeling wasn't mutual, so that kind of tore us apart. Since my friendship with my best friend was hitting the rocks, I happily let him back into my life. I didn't see the problem. I needed a friend anyway. We started to hang out more often, and I hung out less with my best friend. Interestingly, my best friend wasn't disturbed by that, and it was unusual because she always got jealous when it looked like I was hanging out more with our other friends. I was glad to have my friend back anyway. We did things together, and he visited my house a couple of times too. One day, my boyfriend asked me about him and if he had feelings for me. I assured my boyfriend that even though he did have feelings for me, that ship had long sailed. My boyfriend said okay, but I could tell that he didn't believe me. Later on, I noticed that my boyfriend started to hate our friendship. He just did not like my friend and hated it when we hung out. I almost ended my relationship with my boyfriend because I could not handle being with someone who didn't want me to have guy friends or didn't trust me around them. My mom was in an abusive relationship with my dad, so I'd sworn never to be in her shoes. I decided that I was going to have a conversation with my boyfriend, and the outcome of that conversation would determine whether or not I was going to keep dating him. During my conversation with my boyfriend, I found out that my best friend had told her brother, my boyfriend, that my guy friend and I used to like each other very much, and that he wanted me back. She had put so many ideas in his head that he even considered that my guy friend and I had been doing stuff. I assured my boyfriend that nothing of the sort was happening and made him promise to talk to me about these things instead of harboring suspicions and keeping them to himself. After that, I talked to my guy friend and found out that my best friend had told him that I still had feelings for him and that he had a chance. That explained why he texted me out of the blue. My boyfriend was livid and he confronted his sister. I never did that. I just silently cut her out of my life and carefully thought of revenge. My best friend had always been a selfish person. She wanted things done in her way, even things that did not concern her at all. The only person she reserved her selflessness for was her boyfriend, a guy she was secretly dating because he would not claim her publicly. She was madly in love with him and insisted that he was too, but he hardly ever showed her any affection. He wanted to keep their relationship on the down low because he was dating a girl in her senior year. He would lie to her that they were broken up and that he didn't want the school to know to avoid hurting her feelings, but we always saw them together in school. They were considered the star couple in school. I think on some level my friend knew that her boyfriend and his girl were cool, but she was okay with being the other woman if that was the only way to be with him. I decided that as revenge, I was going to let everyone know they were dating. I knew the guy was going to be mad about that and leave her, and it would upset her very much. She'd also sent me an intimate photo they took together that he made her delete almost immediately. I sent the photo to someone, who then sent it to someone who was known for gossiping in school, and that is how the photo spread. As I envisaged, he was mad at her and broke up with her, while he and his girlfriend took a break or something. She knew I did it and she tried to confront me on different occasions at her house, but I ignored her. Later on, she sent a message telling me that she was sorry and that she'd like us to forgive each other for what we had both done. I ignored that too. There was no way I was going to keep being best friends with her after everything she did. I know her last 2 years in school were miserable because everyone called her a homewrecker and accused her of trying to come between their model couple. I'm married to her brother now, but we still hate each other. I'm actually curious what the percentages would be if you asked people, would you be okay with your best friend dating your sibling? Assuming that situation can be done legally, of course. Like, would it absolutely ruin your friendship with your best friend if you found out that they were going steady with your sibling? Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is, my coworker stole my work and I made him regret it. My coworker S took all the credit for my hard work and the work I'd spent the most part of my time creating. In all honesty, this was just a simple misunderstanding, as I had thought, and as he had told me, but the only thing I wanted from him at the time was just for him to fess up and admit that the work was definitely not his and that it was certainly mine. I needed him to do this because my promotion was on the line and I couldn't stand by and watch my chance to finally get promoted be hindered by the greed of a coworker and supposed friend. Little did I know that not only was this intentional, but he'd been planning on sabotaging my entire promotion for the longest time, and I only found out when he admitted to it himself. I got really engaged, as I guess he thought there was nothing I could do and no piece of evidence I could bring against him. He thought wrong, as I'd been recording and documenting my progress from the very beginning, and I am very sure that this was more than enough evidence needed to get back what was truly mine. It was time to give him a serious reality check. For the longest time, being the second son and also second child of my family, I was always overshadowed by the shining and brilliant light of my brother. He was the first son and the golden child of my parents. He had set the bar of expectations so high that it was practically impossible for me to even scale through, as even though I did the very best that I could, it never seemed enough for my parents. They were always expecting the best and nothing but the best, but it was basically impossible for me at the time. However, this didn't stop me, as it would have been shameful of me in the eyes of my younger siblings who were looking up to me to give up right when things were looking impossible for me and all. Anyways, after my brother had left home for college, all eyes were on me. And I must say, I never thought I could have worked as hard as I did. But even so, my parents still weren't as impressed as they were when my brother graduated with distinction. I needed to do exactly what he did, and I only fell short of their expectations when compared to my brother. But this didn't really stop me, as I had my sights set higher, as I wanted to really make a name for myself and prove to my parents that life is not all about getting good grades, but actually having the ability to make a name and a living for oneself. This was something fundamentally lacking on my brother's path, and also something I realized sooner rather than later. His life was geared solely towards making my father proud with all his good grades, and his actions inadvertently had effects on the rest of us, his siblings. Although life in high school in general was generally troublesome and hard, not to mention in the last, but then it should be known that college was even tougher, as this was where I truly wanted to give up. Everything became totally overwhelming for me at this time, and after some time, I finally did. Only after I had secured something for myself, basically to keep me busy for time to come. My father was totally enraged by this fact, and I was disowned by him at some point, but all of this was by the way, as he soon changed his mind and decision later on after my mother had intervened. It was a really tough time. But anyways, the reason I dropped out of college at the time was because I found a really well-paying job, which was centered around one of the things I knew how to do best: design. My father was totally against the idea of me dropping out of college, as he was not a fan of the idea that forgoing a degree for one's passion was a real and possible thing for someone in his household. And still adding to the matter, my brother was still on his academic streak, as he had just bagged his first master's. You could already tell at the time that there was nothing I could have done in my father's eyes that would make him see me in the same light as he did my brother, and because of this, I had to second guess every other decision that was made for me from my father's end. And this included the decision of completing college at the very least. I was introduced to my first client by my then doormate S, and this was when I truly realized that I had the talent for this, and this was something I could greatly excel in if I were to give it my 100% attention and focus. After collecting my first payment from my first client, I had a short time to think about whether or not I was truly going to focus on this, as not long after I found myself flooded with messages and job openings, as my design was very unique and it was one of its kind. Basically everyone wanted it, and my friend S gave them the opportunity to contact me. Although skeptical at first, I came to the conclusion that I was going to take as much as I could, and with the help of my friend S, we were able to gather up an unbelievably large sum from the completion of several works. We couldn't believe our eyes, as this truly seemed like something impossible. And one thing I want to make clear is that I could not have done anything I did without the help of S, as he was very vital in everything. Management was something I lacked, and he was really there to help me out. I was truly happy as this was something that made both of our talents flourish. The best part of everything was yet to come, as when we were both done with college, we didn't have to wait for long or search too far in order to get a job. We could have basically lived the next couple of years of our lives spending what we had got from our hard work, but almost immediately, as if they were waiting for us to be done with college, one of the top game production companies sent the both of us a letter offering us internship positions, which was just a formal term of them saying that they needed us to get experience at their company before getting formally employed. The whole situation was confusing for both myself and S, as we were confused as what to do with this offer. Little did we know that the incentives that we were bound to receive was much more than what we were expecting. And although we had made an unbelievably large sum while we were working our first contracts together, it could not be compared to what we were going to be receiving when we started working with the company. After a thorough analysis on the pros and cons of our then current state, and the job opportunity that had presented itself before us, we came to the conclusion that although we didn't need to work at the time, what we had seemed minuscule when compared to what the company was offering at the time. And so we accepted the job offer. Entering into the workforce was something that I was really ecstatic about. S, on the other hand, was not as ecstatic as I was, but I didn't know this until quite a while later. While I was placed in the graphics design team, S was placed in the management team, as this was the area where we both had experience in. Our first 5 months were used for internship, as stated in our contracts, and from then on, we were formally and contractually bound to the company on the basis of employment. This was when the disparities began to arise in both S's world and mine, as upon our employment, we were both receiving very different pay slips. In this case, I wouldn't say different. It was more or less like our levels of improvement were very different, as in my first complete year as an employee of the company, I was already put up for promotion as my work spoke for itself. S, on the other hand, was still stagnant for the first year, and I thought that this was just going to be for the first year, and so I was still cheering him on, as he was my friend all in all, and I couldn't stand by and watch as my friend was being stagnant in his field of operation and not offer him the slightest bit of assistance or consolation that I could, as his friend. However, his dry spell went on for the next 4 years, as at this time it was already evident that he was never going to progress in his field. And I could tell that he was already beginning to feel some type of way towards me, as people in the company were already beginning to make contrasting remarks between the both of us. I, for one, was not accommodating of any and everything that was being said to him, and I always stood up and fought for him whenever I was in the position to do so. This is where things got really interesting. So normally back at the company, there was a promotional event, which was supposed to help with the launch of the company's newest game that had been in development for quite some time, and a competition was held. Basically, the winner of the competition was going to get a certain promotion regardless of their team or department. This seemed like an opportunity to make a name for myself, as I could attain an even higher level for myself. Basically, it was all as a means for me to prove my father wrong and all. But then I was still being considerate of S, and the fact that this was going to be a chance for him to get something he wanted too. And so I sought to drop out of the competition at first. But along the line, when we both had a conflict of interest and he tried to guilt trip me into dropping out, even though I had already decided that from the start, I was so upset that I decided to enter the competition again. However, this was when something shocking happened. I realized that my work had already been submitted and I couldn't resubmit. I was confused, as I know for a fact that I had not submitted it. I tried to make an inquiry as to when and who submitted it, and that was when I found out that it was submitted under S's name. I was so furious, as I truly wanted to know the reason why he would steal my work and how he even did it. However, upon approaching him, he tried to tell me off by saying I was too lax with my work, and he made it his. He also tried to make me know that he was now going to make it. After all these years, I had no problem with him stealing the work anymore, as I knew it was out of desperation. However, I wanted him to admit it, which he didn't. This is when I got pissed, and I sought to crumble his dreams. He had no idea that I had the genesis of my work, and all he had was the finished product. So I submitted my original work to the committee, and his work was withdrawn under review. He approached me and tried to get me to withdraw what I had submitted, and I told him what had been done had been done. And a few days later, his contract with the company was terminated. I hated to have lost a good friend like S, but it was circumstances that led us to that moment, and there was nothing more I could do after he had crossed the line. I think this should really hurt for that ex-friend. They may never know how much of a total wingman awesome friend OP actually is. Like the fact that OP was almost willing to go along with it and allow them to just take their work for themselves, all at just the measly cost of being honest about it. Like that person doesn't understand like how good of a friend they just lost. Let alone, well, their job. Our next story is, Pharmacist husband has an illegal side job, so I called the cops on him. My husband, Andy, 35-year-old male, and I, 30-year-old female, first met at his pharmaceutical store. Technically, I had no idea he was the owner of the store. I had just moved into the city working to work on bagging my PhD degree. My life was a mess. I hardly had time for myself. I was a microbiologist working on a study that required me staying overnight to watch cultures and microorganisms. My group members and I took turns, but still, it was hard. Coffee was my best friend, and it didn't help that I was squatting with a friend of mine whose boyfriend recently moved into her apartment. I could tell that they needed their space and sometimes used my project as an excuse to give them space. The problem was I was a broke girl who solely relied on the little money I made from serving coffee and waitressing at the restaurant downtown. Now, this was convenient for me because I got to have as much coffee as I wanted, which slowly began to cause insomnia. I went to the pharmaceutical store to get some drugs to help me sleep due to my messed up schedule. I explained to the boy at the counter I was having trouble sleeping and needed something to help with that. The guy at the counter, a teenager, went inside the office to tell his boss something, and Andy came out. He asked me a couple of questions, which I found dreary, and requested I reduced my coffee intake. At the time, I was mad, mainly because I thought it was none of his business. I walked out of the store in hopes of finding someplace else to get what I was looking for somewhere else, but as I walked down the pavement leading to my friend's apartment, I gave it a thought and decided to cut back on my coffee intake. I didn't realize how hard that would be until I started to do it. It didn't help that I served coffee to customers. I decided to switch shifts with a person in charge of washing the dishes just to lessen the urge. I got angry and irritable by the littlest things, and I could feel my body reacting differently due to the lack of caffeine. I went to the pharmaceutical store to confront Andy. I knew it wasn't his fault, but it was his idea, and it was hard to keep denying myself coffee. Andy was shocked to see me. He politely offered me a seat and gave me some activities to work on. I reluctantly helped sort the drugs he had asked me to arrange alphabetically, and by the end of the night, I was hired as a staff in his store. I explained my situation to him with college and everything, so he adjusted my working hours to the time that suited me. He said it wasn't right I worked somewhere they sold coffee when I was trying to abstain from caffeine. This actually helped. Working at a store was more fun than I'd considered it would be, and it helped me get better sleep because it was less stressful. Due to my funny schedule, sometimes Andy and I would end up being the last staff to lock up. We would order pizza and eat while we talked about our lives. Andy hails from a small town in Texas. His father was a farmer and his mom a housewife. He had always known that he was smart and always wanted to live in the big city, so he worked hard and saved enough to move when he got a scholarship from his college. He was once married, which lasted for about 5 years before they got divorced. Andy had a big pharmaceutical store. I knew there was a back storage compartment where they stored different products, but I'd never been there because I'd been warned to stick to my part of the job, and I did. Andy and I had a pattern where we would wait till all the workers left the store, order in takeouts, and talk. We officially started dating 2 months later, and one thing led to another, and I became pregnant by the 8th month. It wasn't the ideal plan at the time because I wanted to get my PhD degree first, but that also wasn't going great since my supervisor was a huge pain in the butt who would always have complaints about any outcome. We had stopped working in groups and we now solo, but this man kept taunting us to our breaking point. I told my parents about the pregnancy, and I was surprised with how calm my parents were when I expected them to give me heck, but they were cool about it. So was Andy. He was also excited to be a father. It wasn't that I wasn't excited, but a lot going on in my life at the time. My PhD program wasn't going as I thought it would, and I was going to 30 without a stable job and a stable apartment, while Andy and I just started dating not too long ago. Andy proposed a month after we found out about the baby. I gave him several reasons on why that was a bad idea, but he always had a reasonable response for each of them. When I talked about how I was broke and squatting with someone, he said he made enough money for two and asked me to move in with him. When I told him about how stressed I was about my program, he asked me to take a break from the school authorities on the grounds of pregnancy and go back after I had the baby. Truth be told, something just didn't sit right with me, and our relationship was just too fast. But it was better than being abandoned by the father of my child, so I moved in with him. Andy met my parents and they immediately loved him. He had a nerdy way of dressing. Maybe that was what impressed them. His rounded frame glasses or his shirt and tie, or maybe it was his job and how smart he sounded, but they absolutely loved him. I never met his parents till our wedding day. This wasn't due to lack of trying, but he was always procrastinating our visit till the wedding day. They were nice people who didn't hold it against us, but they were happy for us. My husband wasn't too thrilled when he and his father were having a private discussion at the night of the wedding before they left. I wasn't sure why he looked upset, but when I asked, he said it was nothing. I waved it off as nothing since it was our happy day, and before I knew it, Andy was back to his normal, cheerful self. I took a break from college when I began to show. I had so much spare time I didn't know what to do with it, so I decided to help out in the store. Andy didn't like the idea of me stressing myself out, so I was limited to recording and bookkeeping. It wasn't too hard. I kept track of the amount of drugs being delivered and leaving the store. My job entails me going into the storage room of the pharmaceutical store, which I noticed was always locked. I once confronted Andy about it, and he said that he was the only one with a key and he needed it to stay that way. At first, I was convinced he was right. Maybe it had to do with the fact that he was the sole owner of the store, and I had no right to question his ways when at work. But then it dawned on me that I was his wife and he had certain obligations to me. Surely it wouldn't be so bad as to request for a key just to do my job properly. The next day, I brought up the key to the storage room matter, and we had a huge argument. I had never seen Andy so adamant and furious over anything as much as he was on the matter. In that moment, I knew something else was going on. I thought about it all day, and my first guess was my husband had gone bankrupt and was trying to hide it from me. I remembered the teenager, Sean, I saw the first time I came to my husband's pharmacy. I had seen him go in and out several times. He must have a key. I decided I was going to ask him the next day. I waited patiently for Sean to arrive for his shift and asked him about the key. Oddly, a day before, the boss had asked him to drop off his keys. Now, this just confirmed my suspicions. Something was indeed going on. I wanted to let the matter rest because I was certainly afraid of what I might find in the storage room, but something kept gnawing at me to check it out. I made my first move a week after the matter had subsided. My husband by now thought I was over the matter since he apologized as soon as he came home the night after our argument, telling me it was for the best. I pretended to agree with him, only to go after the storage key. I made sure to check out the key that best fit the lock days earlier and intuitively took one. The first attempt was a bust, but that just made me more intentional about getting the storage room opened. I took the second, third, and fourth key, making sure to place each key back into the key holder before taking the next until I finally got it. This must have been 2 weeks later. My husband had an excessive amount of morphine stacked on the shelves, enough for me to know it wasn't normal for a pharmaceutical store, and the records of goods coming in never once accounted for these amount of drugs. I was spiraling in confusion. I didn't understand what my husband used this level of drugs for. Maybe I did, I just didn't want to admit it to myself. Hubby came around the store as usual, and by now I was back to my workspace at the store, acting gullible about the whole thing. This act went on for weeks. Weeks turned into months, and while I kept thinking of whether or not to confront him about it, he was just the same Andy. I was almost 9 months pregnant when I searched for his ex-wife's number and gave her a call. She and I met up at a restaurant when I asked her what had happened between her and Andy. She made a look that confirmed my suspicions. Andy was selling these drugs illegally, and when hinted I knew, she spoke up saying she tried to stop him so many times, but he never wanted to stop, so she divorced him. I asked her why she never reported him to the police, and she said she couldn't bring herself to do it. That night, I confronted Andy, and all he had to say was he never wanted to put me in such a position where I would have to protect his secret. I asked him how he was so sure that I would keep his secret, and he laughed and said I was carrying his child and wouldn't want my child to be fatherless. I called the cops on him the next day and had him arrested. It wasn't his last statement that made me call the cops on him. It was the fact that I was once a caffeine addict and I knew what that did to me. So I can only imagine the amount of life that must have been so screwed up due to his side hustle, and I'm sure my child wouldn't want me to be a part of that. I gave birth to my baby girl and recently finished my PhD, about to start my first research job. I always take my daughter to see her in-laws, who are always pleased to have her, and this was how I got to know Andy's dad also warned Andy against his illegal job and knew he got what he deserved. Well, realistically, I think there was only two ways this could possibly go down. You either go full Skylar White and begrudgingly endorse this empire he's building in the storage room, or you report them like OP did and you wash your hands of it. I mean, once that cat's out of the bag, you can't really remain ignorant about it, right? But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.